Officer Barry, a strict cop, arrested a 9-year-old black girl, confident he was just doing his job. But 10 minutes later, karma hit in a way he never saw coming. What unfolded next set off a chain of events that turned his entire life upside down. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Officer Barry walked the quiet streets of Maple Grove, looking around every turn and alley. The weight of his badge on his chest made him always think of his job to serve and protect. However, Barry had to do his job and follow the rules to the letter, no exceptions or excuses. Barry's thoughts went back to his youth as he walked his beat. He knew how hard life could be because he grew up in a working-class home. His family had needed help from community groups in the past. But he had long forgotten about those times, because he always believed in law and order. Barry liked being a tough cop who didn't put up with nonsense. He didn't have time for sad stories or second chances. He thought the law was clear-cut, and it was his job to follow it no matter what. His co-workers often made fun of the fact that he could quote the whole police manual while he was asleep. Barry saw a group of teens hanging out near the corner shop as he turned onto Oak Street. His eyes got narrow, and he started to think suspiciously right away. He picked up the speed, and his hand naturally went to rest on his belt. "All right, break it up," he said, in a firm voice. When he suddenly showed up, the teens looked up, shocked. One of the boys stepped forward with a worried smile on his face and asked, "What's going on here?" "Nothing, officer. We're just hanging out." Barry looked over the group to see if there was any sign of trouble. To be honest, he didn't believe them for a second. From what he knew, groups of kids always meant trouble. He said, "I don't want to see any loitering. Move along now." As the teens walked away, looking over their shoulders with suspicion, Barry felt good about himself. Just like he always did, he stopped trouble before it grew. For him, the best way to keep the peace was to think the worst could happen. Officer Barry kept walking around, and the scene changed to the busy grocery store a few blocks away. Natalie, 9, stood next to her mother, Caroline, as they made their way through the store's busy aisles. Natalie looked at the bright displays of fruits and veggies with big brown eyes that were full of wonder. Her long, dark hair was pulled back into a ponytail and swayed gently as she walked. Because she had just eaten a candy bar, there was a small chocolate stain on the bottom of her favorite blue sundress. Nicole asked her mom in a soft, sweet voice, "Mommy, can we get strawberries?" Caroline looked down at her daughter and smiled. She gently squeezed her hand. "Of course, sweetie, they're on the list." Caroline thought it was crazy how crowded the store was as they walked through it. There were long lines to pay, and people were rubbing up against each other in the tight aisles. She looked at her watch and saw that she still had a lot of shopping to do. Caroline got down on her knees to look her daughter in the eyes and said, "Nat, honey, it's really crowded in here. Would you mind waiting for me outside by the door? I'll be faster if I finish up by myself." Natalie nodded, and her eyes got really big as she did. "Okay, Mommy, I'll be good and stay right by the door." Caroline smiled and gently touched her daughter's cheek. It was her turn to reach into her bag and pull out a small pack of crackers. "That's my girl. You can have these while you wait. I won't be long, I promise." Natalie took the crackers with a big smile on her face. "Thank you, Mommy," Caroline said as she watched Natalie skip toward the store's front door. Natalie's little sundress swished around her knees. As any mother would, she had a little fear, but she knew Natalie was a good kid. The store was in a safe area, and she would only be gone for a short time. Natalie did what her mother asked and found a spot near the door. Sitting on a small seat, she swung her legs back and forth while she ate snacks. She looked at the people going by and smiled shyly at those who caught her eye. Natalie was patient as she sat on the small bench outside the grocery store. She slowly ate her crackers while taking in the sights of the store. She looked at the busy people coming and going from the store. with interested eyes, as the sun warmed her face. She held on to her small snack, being careful not to get any on her yellow sundress. Officer Barry's police car slowly drove down the street while Natalie waited. He looked around quickly, always on the lookout for anything that didn't seem right. When he saw the girl walking by the store door by herself, he raised an eyebrow in suspicion. Barry stopped his car across the street and stared at Natalie very carefully. He saw that she had a snack in her hand, and that she looked around uncomfortably. All of this made Barry think that he might be in trouble. He muttered to himself, probably shoplifting. His jaw was set in a hard line. Or loitering, at the very least. With no thought, Barry got out of his police car and walked steadily across the street, naturally resting his hand on his belt. The officer walked up to Natalie with a serious, unbending face. Natalie looked up as the shadow of the officer fell over her. Her eyes got bigger as a mix of fear and interest took over them. Officer Barry's face made her feel uncomfortable, even though she had always been taught that police officers were there to help. "Excuse me, young lady," Barry said, in a rough, bossy voice. "What are you doing here all alone?" Natalie forced herself to swallow hard, and her voice came out in a shy whisper. "I'm waiting for my mommy, sir. She's inside shopping." Barry's eyes got narrow as he looked at Natalie's food. He pointed at the crackers and asked, "And where did you get that?" Natalie replied with a slightly shaking lower lip. "My mommy gave them to me, sir, to eat while I wait." Officer Barry did not seem to be persuaded. He stood tall and crossed his arms over the little girl. "Are you sure about that? You didn't take it from the store without paying?" Nicole's eyes started to tear up as she shook her head hard. "No, sir, I promise. My mommy gave them to me." With each passing second, Barry's doubts grew. Something about this girl made him think she was up to no good. He made up his mind right away to do something. "All right, that's enough," Barry said in a harsh voice. "I think you've been stealing from the store, young lady." Natalie looked at him with wide eyes of shock and confusion. But I didn't," she's stuttering, her voice shaking. He didn't give her a chance to say anything. With all his strength, he grabbed Natalie's arm. He said, "You're coming with me," and there was no way to argue with him. Natalie started to cry, and her little body started to shake with fear. She yelled, "Please, I didn't do anything wrong," but her words were all over the place. "My mommy, she's inside, please." Barry didn't pay attention, though. He was too focused on what he thought was right and too sure of what he thought to hear Natalie's pleas for truth. A few people began to gather as Barry began to lead Natalie away. A mix of worry and interest filled the faces of those who stopped to watch the scene play out. Someone asked in a whisper, "What's going on?" Someone else asked, "Is that little girl in trouble?" As Barry pulled Natalie toward his police car, her sobs got louder. She tried to explain again, but her speech was broken and full of tears. Barry didn't seem to care when she said, "Please, I'm just waiting for my mommy." He opened the back door of his police car and got ready to put Natalie inside. As the crowd grew, there were whispers of shock and worry among the people watching. A few people took out their phones and started recording what was going on. Natalie's cries could be heard all around. As Barry lifted her into the car, her small body shook. Her snack fell to the ground, and she forgot about it in the rush of the moment. Caroline came out of the store carrying a lot of bags. She looked all around the area to find Natalie. It stopped her heart to see what she did. A few feet away, her little girl was handcuffed. Her face was wet with tears, and her little body was shaking from sobs. A police officer stood over her and put his hand on her shoulder. Caroline yelled, "Natalie," and dropped her bags without giving it a second thought. She ran to her daughter, while her mind was filled with shock and confusion. She asked, with a voice shaking from fear and anger, "What's going on here? Why is my daughter in handcuffs?" Officer Barry turned his stern face toward Caroline. "Ma'am, I caught this girl stealing from the store," he said, in a serious tone. Caroline's eyes got really big in shock. Stealing? That's impossible. She was waiting for me while I finished shopping. Natasha looked up at her mom with tears in her eyes. She cried, "Mommy, I didn't do anything wrong. I told him I was waiting for you, but he wouldn't listen." Caroline became very angry. She looked at Barry with fiery eyes. "How dare you? My daughter is innocent. She would never steal." Barry didn't back down, even though Caroline was very angry. "I was just doing my job, ma'am. I saw a suspicious situation and acted accordingly." "Suspicious?" Caroline squeaked out. "She's a 9-year-old girl waiting for her mother. There's nothing suspicious about that." As more people joined the group, they could hear whispers and pointing. Caroline saw that some people were recording the scene on their phones. Caroline yelled, "Take these handcuffs off my daughter right now." Her voice was shaking with anger. "This is completely unacceptable." Barry wasn't sure what to do. He looked back and forth between Caroline and Natalie. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I have procedures to follow." Caroline moved toward Barry and looked right into his eyes. "Your procedures? Your procedures led you to handcuff an innocent child? Without even trying to understand the situation? Is this really how you do your job?" As Caroline looked at Officer Barry, her face turned red with anger. The group of people around them got bigger, and their sneers got louder by the second. With her voice shaking with anger, Caroline yelled, "You can't just arrest kids for no reason. What kind of police officer does that?" Barry moved awkwardly and looked at the people watching. He could feel their critical eyes on him, but he wouldn't give up. "Ma'am, I was following protocol. When I see suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity?" Caroline asked, cutting him off. "She's a little girl eating a snack. How is that suspicious?" A woman in the crowd spoke up. "That's right. I saw her waiting here earlier. She wasn't doing anything wrong." Barry's jaw got tight. He knew he was wrong, but it felt impossible for him to say so. He said in a stiff voice, "Look, I'm just trying to keep our community safe." "How?" Caroline asked back. "By scaring innocent kids?" She got down on her knees next to Natalie, who was still quietly crying. "It's okay, sweetie. Mommy's here now." Barry saw the sweet moment between the mother and daughter and felt a little doubt, but he quickly pushed it away. "I was doing my job," he said. Caroline stood up, and her eyes were burning. "Your job is to protect and serve, not to bully and intimidate. I'm filing a formal complaint against you, officer. This kind of behavior is unacceptable." The crowd agreed with a mutter. "Yeah, he should be ashamed of himself," someone yelled. Barry's face turned red, but he didn't back down. "You have the right to file a complaint, ma'am, but I stand by my actions," she said in a low, scary voice. "Oh, you can bet I'll be filing that complaint, and I won't stop there. I'll make sure everyone knows how you treat innocent children in this community." She looked at the crowd. "Did anyone record this? I need proof of this police officer's bad behavior." Several people nodded and held up their phones. When Barry saw how badly things had gone off the rails, his eyes got really big. Caroline looked back at Barry with her eyes getting smaller. "Now, are you going to take these handcuffs off my daughter? Or do I need to call your supervisor?" Barry walked into the police office with a serious look on his face. His co-workers looked at him with interest, but he went right to his desk. He sighed deeply and ran his hand through his short hair as he sat down. He told himself, "I was just doing my job," to get rid of the uncomfortable feeling in his gut. He tried very hard, but he just couldn't forget the little girl's sad face or her mother's angry words. He grabbed a stack of papers and set out to lose himself in the boring parts of his job. A voice called out across the station before he could even pick up his pen. "Officer Barry, the chief wants to see you in his office now." Barry's brow stood up and his head snapped up. He wasn't used to being called in so quickly by the boss. Getting more and more scared, he got up from his desk and went to the chief's office. As soon as Barry walked in, he noticed that his boss was looking very serious. He was told to sit down by the boss. He made a thin line with his lips. The boss spoke in a serious tone. "Barry, we have a problem." Barry was shocked when he heard the words. "A formal complaint has been filed against you for racial profiling." "What?" "But," he started, but the chief cut him off with a hand. "The incident at the grocery store this afternoon. The mother of the girl you arrested has filed a complaint, and it's serious, Barry. Very serious." He could feel his face getting hot. "Chief, I was just following protocol. I saw suspicious activity, and you arrested a 9-year-old girl for no reason." The chief ended for him in a sharp voice. When someone told Barry, "You're being investigated right now," it hit him like a punch. As the chief continued to describe what would happen, he was stunned and could hardly hear him. He was having a hard time figuring out how fast everything had gone wrong. He felt like he was walking in a daze as he left the chief's office. All of a sudden, the station seemed too bright and loud. He fell back to his desk and hit his head on the chair. He asked himself in a low voice, how did this happen? As he stared at his computer screen, Barry began to doubt everything he thought he knew about being a good cop for the first time in his career. Barry's world started to fall apart around him as the days went by. Because of how long the investigation into what happened at the grocery store went on, he was fired, and his badge was taken away. The train stop that once felt like a second home was now cold and unfriendly. Barry looked at the morning paper while sitting at his kitchen table. The title of the story stared back at him. Local officer under investigation for racial profiling. He pushed the paper away, feeling sick to his stomach. He said in a low voice, "This is ridiculous," and ran his hand through his messy hair. "I was just doing my job. How can they not see that?" But there was a voice in the back of his mind that bugged him. Was he really just doing his job, or had he made assumptions? Based on what? Barry shook his head, not wanting to think about it. Things were not much better at the stop. When Barry went by to get some personal items, he saw that his coworkers were looking away or suddenly had important things to do. Officer Martinez, who he thought of as a friend, gave him a quick nod and then ran off. Barry yelled, "Hey, Martinez!" His voice echoed through the room, which had become very quiet. In a tense moment, Martinez asked, "Want to grab a coffee later?" "Sorry, Barry. I've got stuff to do. Maybe another time." As Barry watched his coworkers move back, the weight of being alone fell heavily on his shoulders. He was proud to be a good police officer who always did what was right to keep people safe. How did that get him here? Barry paced back and forth in his living room at home, going over what had happened 100 times in his thoughts. The picture of the scared little girl's face kept flashing before his eyes. But he pushed it away each time, holding desperately to his belief. "I saw something fishy going on," he told his empty apartment. Any good cop would have done the same thing. It had nothing to do with, but he just couldn't say it out loud. It was too much to bear to think that his acts might have been based on racism. He thought it went against everything he stood for. Being alone in the dark as night fell was hard for Barry because of the choices he had made. Even though there was more and more evidence against him, he held on tight to his denial. Instead of facing the truth about himself and the results of his deeds, he chose to hide. In the middle of the night, Caroline sat on Natalie's bed and stroked her hair softly. She held her favorite toy animal close to her chest, and her eyes were still puffy from crying. Natalie asked her mom, "Mommy, why did that cop think I was bad?" Her voice was weak and shaking. Caroline felt sad when her daughter asked her a question that seemed so innocent. She took a deep breath and tried not to get angry for Natalie's sake. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. That officer made a big mistake, and we're going to make sure he knows it." Natalie said yes, but Caroline could still see the hurt and confusion in her eyes. She hugged her daughter tight and pulled her close. Caroline told Natalie in a soft but strong voice, "Listen to me. You are a good girl, and what happened wasn't your fault. We're going to fight for justice, okay? Mommy's going to make sure that officer learns he can't treat people this way. Caroline quietly left the room as Natalie fell asleep. With each step, her determination grew. She picked up the phone in the kitchen and called a number a friend had given her. When the doorbell rang, Caroline asked, "Hello, is this the office of Johnson and Associates? I need to speak with a lawyer about filing a formal complaint against a police officer." The next hour, Caroline told the lawyer what happened. Her voice was shaking with emotion as she talked about what Barry did and how upset Natalie was. The lawyer told her, "We can start the process right away. What happened to your daughter is unacceptable, and we'll do everything we can to hold this officer accountable." Caroline felt both relieved and angry after she hung up the phone, even though she was glad to be doing something. The thought of Natalie in handcuffs still made her angry. She went to the window and looked out at the street, which was quiet. She whispered, "We won't let this go, Barry," and her hands clenched into fists. "You're going to learn that you can't just hurt innocent children and walk away." The next day, Barry was sitting in his car outside of the community center, with his hands firmly on the driving wheel. It felt like getting hit in the face. "When I was told I had to go to sensitivity training." He looked at the clock on the console and knew that he had to do it right away. He got out of the car with a sigh of relief and walked slowly toward the building. "Every step felt like a loss for me." With his mouth closed, he said, "This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job." Inside, the room was full of different kinds of people, some in dress and some in casual clothes. John crossed his arms over his chest and sat down in the back. Looking around at the faces of the people around him made him feel angry. He felt like he didn't fit with the police officers who had done something wrong. The session started with the friendly face from the teacher, a middle-aged woman. "Welcome, everyone. We're here to learn how to work with others and be sensitive to their needs." Barry rolled his eyes and almost laughed out loud. Most of the greeting he didn't pay attention to because his mind was on what happened with Natalie. He still didn't get why everyone was arguing about it so much. Having doubts was part of the job, right? Barry found himself getting more and more defensive as the lesson went on. It seemed like every situation and topic of conversation was an attack on his judgment and job. "Remember," he said, "our goal is to serve and protect all members of our community, regardless of age, race, or background." He could feel his face getting hot. His first thought was that he already knew everything and didn't need to be here. He knew that making a fuss would only make things worse, so he bit his tongue. Barry didn't want to take part in a group activity, so he gave short, clipped answers. His fellow trainees noticed how he was acting and kept their distance by swapping looks. Because the lesson was over, Barry was tired and angry. He couldn't get rid of the feeling that everything was wrong. So he thought, he was a good cop who had made a quick choice based on years of experience. Why did no one see that? Every minute that Barry sat through the first half of the sensitivity training, his frown got worse. Sarah, the teacher, stood at the front of the room and pointed to a PowerPoint show. She had a friendly smile and was very patient. Sarah spoke in a soft but firm voice. "Today, we're going to talk about how important empathy is in our work. Understanding the perspectives of those we serve is crucial to build trust in our communities." Barry moved around in his seat awkwardly and fought the urge to roll his eyes. When he looked around the room, he saw that his fellow cops were paying close attention. "That's crazy. How could they believe this?" Sarah said, "We all have biases, whether we realize it or not. It's important to recognize and address these biases to ensure fair treatment for everyone in our community." Barry's jaw tightened. He didn't favor anyone. He was suspicious of everyone until they were proved innocent. That was just good police work, right? When Sarah talked about racial bias in particular, Barry's arguments got even stronger. He had caught people of all races, so he wasn't racist. It felt like this whole program was an attack on his character. Building relationships with community members is key to effective policing, Sarah told us. When people trust us, they're more likely to cooperate and help us keep the neighborhood safe. Barry could no longer hold back. He put up his hand and made a mean face. With all due respect, ma'am, how are we supposed to do our jobs if we're always second-guessing ourselves? Sometimes you have to make quick decisions based on what you see. Sarah answered his question with a nod. You have a good point, officer, but part of what we're learning here is how to. Don't base those quick decisions on harmful assumptions or stereotypes, Barry said, with a shaky head. He found himself tuning out more and more as the lesson went on. He thought that this training was a waste of time. No amount of talk about how kind people are would change the fact that he knew how to do his job. Barry was more than ready to leave when the meeting was over. He quickly got his things together and avoided looking at Sarah and the other cops. As he left the building, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that everything had been wrong and pointless. Over the next few days, Barry felt himself getting more and more uncomfortable as the training lesson went on. Sarah, the teacher, changed the subject to unconscious bias. Sarah spoke in a calm, non-judgmental voice and said, implicit bias is the unconscious attitudes or stereotypes that shape how we understand, act, and make decisions. It's important to recognize that everyone has these biases, even if we don't realize it. Barry moved around in his seat and crossed his arms over his chest very tightly. He felt like he had to defend himself. He had always been proud of being fair and unbiased. So the thought that he might have secret biases seemed silly to him. Sarah said, these biases can affect our decision-making, especially in high-stress situations. For police officers, this can lead to unfair treatment of certain groups, even when we don't intend it. As Sarah talked about some ways that unconscious bias could show up in police work, Barry could feel a knot forming in his stomach. Some of the things she talked about sounded too familiar to be true. Remember, Sarah said, as she looked around, acknowledging our biases doesn't make us bad people. It's the first step in becoming better officers and serving our community more effectively. Barry's thoughts went back to what happened with Natalie. He was so sure she was up to no good, but now he started to have a little doubt. Had he really looked at the situation fairly? Or had he made assumptions about her? Based on how she looked and the color of her skin, he felt uncomfortable with the thought. He didn't want to believe that he was capable of being so unfair. Though, as the class went on, Barry found it harder and harder to completely ignore what the teacher was saying. Barry felt up in the air by the end of the training. A part of him still wanted to reject everything he had heard and hold on to the idea that he was always right. There was, however, a rising part of them that wondered if what they were being taught might be true. As Barry walked to his car, he couldn't get rid of the idea that he might need to look more closely at what he was doing, and thought. Barry had to deal with a new task the next day of training: role-playing games. Sarah told everyone, today we'll be switching roles. You will each take turns being a civilian in different situations, he said. Barry's stomach tightened. He really didn't like the sound of this. Barry had to play the part of a young black man who was pulled over by the police for a regular check of his car in the first exercise. Barry felt more and more uneasy as he played out the scene with another officer playing the cop. In this case, the police officer was rude to him and demanded to see his license and registration without giving him a reason. Barry was scared and confused, and he kept tripping over his words. Sarah asked, "How does this make you feel?" when the scene was over. Barry was unsure. Almost reluctantly, he said, I felt helpless. Like I was guilty before I even spoke. As the drills went on, Barry played different parts, such as a Hispanic woman being asked about her citizenship, an elderly Asian man being accused of shoplifting, and a Muslim teenager being detained at an airport. With each situation, Barry felt more and more uncomfortable. He had never felt fear, anger, or helplessness before, at least not from this point of view. He started to understand that even small things a leader did or said could have a big effect on someone. Barry was taking a break when he started to think about Natalie. When he first talked to her, he remembers how scared she looked, and how she tried to explain herself, but couldn't. He really thought about how she must have felt for the first time at that moment. The first pushback from Barry started to fall apart as the day went on. He became more involved, asking questions and really trying to understand the points of view that were being discussed. When the lesson was over, Barry was tired, but also in a strange way wiser. He couldn't get rid of the feeling that something very important had changed about him. The confidence he had always had in what he did as a police officer wasn't there as much as it used to be. Taking a break from training, Barry went out into the hallway. His head was full of new ideas. Listening to two other cops talk, he leaned against the wall and drank water from a paper cup. "Have you heard of the Helping Hands group?" One cop said. "They're doing great work." "Oh, yeah, I volunteered there last week," said the other person. "This wonderful family runs it. As many needy people in our neighborhood as possible get food from them." Barry became interested in this new neighborhood charity that he had never heard of. The first officer went on, "The mother and daughter who run it are so dedicated. I believe her name is Natalie. She's only 9 years old, but she always helps out." Barry stopped moving, and the cup fell from his hands, spilling water on the floor. "Natasha, Nicole, it can't be the same, right?" The second cop agreed. "Yes, Caroline and Natalie. The trouble began after Caroline's mother died. That's how they show gratitude to the people who helped them through hard times." Barry felt his heart sink when he realized what was going on. That was the same family one he had wrongly picked on. He told him that the little girl he thought was stealing was actually feeding people who are hungry. The mother he had a fight with ran a charity that helped a lot of families. Barry fell against the wall because he felt so bad about what he had done. He felt bad about how he had treated them and how he had made snap decisions based on his own tastes. Now that he knew about their selfless work in the community, he felt bad about what he had done. The cops continued to talk, but Barry could barely hear them because his mind was so busy racing. He was so wrong in everything he did as a police officer, not just what he did that day. Barry couldn't get over the news that Natalie and Caroline were doing good things for others. He was on his lunch break and looking for more information. He put Helping Hands charity into his phone with shaking fingers. The charity's website came up, and it was full of touching stories and pictures of happy families. His eyes got bigger as he scrolled through. Some of the faces were familiar to him. They were neighbors he had grown up with and families he had seen suffer. Then a memory hit him hard. He thought back to Christmas when he was a boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old. His mom was sick, and his dad had lost his job. They didn't have much, but on Christmas Eve, a package showed up at their door. It had a turkey, canned goods, and even a small toy for Barry in it. They told him it was from Santa Helpers. At the time, Barry knew the truth as he looked at the Helping Hand sign, which showed 2 hands holding a heart. It was this organization, which was run by Caroline and Natalie. As the weight of what he had done hit him, Barry's eyes filled with tears. The family he had hurt and the girl he thought had stolen were both part of a group that had helped his own family when they were in need. He put down his phone with shaking hands. He had a terrible sickness. How could he have been so blind and quick to judge? Strangers' kindness had fed his family during their worst times, and he had returned the favor by being mean and suspicious. He couldn't believe how big his mistake was. He buried his face in his hands and shook his head. He was crying quietly. He had forgotten where he came from and how hard his life had been. In his desire to be a good police officer, he had lost touch with the people he was meant to serve and protect. As Barry sat alone in his small apartment, the weight of what he had done hit him like a heavy blanket. He looked at the framed picture of himself in his police outfit. It had made him proud at one point, but now it made him realize how far he had fallen from his ideals. His thoughts went back to when he was a child and that strange box of food showed up on their porch for Christmas. He could still see the happiness and relief in his parents' eyes. They had felt so much better after that act of kindness. "The hell happened to me?" I whispered. Barry said, his voice breaking with emotion. He became a police officer to help people and make a change in his neighborhood. He had lost sight of that goal, though, somewhere along the way. He saw Natalie's scared face flash in front of his eyes. Her big, innocent eyes were filled with tears as he roughly handcuffed her little wrists. Barry felt sick to his stomach with shame and guilt. "I was wrong," he said out loud, but it was hard to hear him. It was the first time since the event that he had said those words. "I was so wrong." When Barry finally let himself feel the full weight of what he had done, his eyes filled with tears. A child was hurt, and a family that had spent their whole lives helping others was hurt. It was the same family that had helped him when he was younger. He realized it all at once, like a wave. He turned into the bully with a badge he had sworn to protect people from. Barry was sobbing so hard that his shoulders shook. Years of holding in, his feelings were finally coming out. Barry felt something change inside him as the tears came out. What he had built up over the years as walls of denial and defense began to fall down. He let himself really feel, for the first time in a long time, feel sorry for what he had done. To feel pity, to feel the pain he had caused others. He said, "I'm sorry," in a whisper, but no one could hear him. "I'm really sorry." John stood outside the community center the next day with his heart racing. Above the door, a big bright sign said, "Caroline's Kitchen, Feeding Hope." He took a deep breath to cool down. Now was the time for him to face the effects of what he had done. Jim opened the door and walked inside with shaky hands. It smelled like fresh bread and soup that was cooking. Volunteers were busy moving around with trays and happy conversations. Barry felt strange for a moment because he was wearing casual clothes instead of his regular uniform. A woman who looked friendly walked up to him. "May I assist you?" With a smile, she asked. Barry took a deep breath. "I want to help," he said, in a voice that was almost a whisper. "Is that all right?" The woman got really excited. "Of course, we need more help all the time. My name is Susan. I'll show you around." Barry looked around the room quickly and uncomfortably as Susan led him through the kitchen. He half expected to see Caroline or Natalie and was afraid of what they would do if they did. But they hadn't been seen yet. Susan pointed to a long table full of veggies and said, "This is where we make the meals. Do you think you can chop some things?" Barry said, yes, happy that the job was easy. As his mind raced, he picked up a knife and started cutting carrots. His actions were stiff. What would he say to Natalie's family if he saw them? If they knew who he was, would they even let him stay? Barry heard bits of conversations going on around him while he worked. A lot of people talked about the families these meals helped and how they changed their lives. He felt the weight of his mistake getting heavier with each story. Susan jumped out of her thinking and told Barry, "You're doing great." She gave him an apron and a hairnet. "Would you mind helping me serve the soup? The doors are almost ready to be open." As Barry poured soup into bowls, his hands shook. He kept his head down and worked hard, not sure if he was really ready to face the people he had hurt. As Barry poured soup into bowls, he saw Caroline walk into the kitchen. He almost dropped the soup he was holding because his heart was racing. Caroline looked into his eyes for a split second before quickly pulling her gaze away. Her face showed a mix of surprise and discomfort. Barry felt terrible about what he had done, but he had to keep going. As Caroline moved to the far end of the serving line to avoid him, he could feel the strain in the air. As the days went by, Barry kept going to the community center. He worked hard every time, whether it was cutting up veggies, mopping floors, or serving food. Caroline and her husband stayed far away from each other and barely acknowledged that he was there. Barry felt very bad about what he had done, but he was determined to show that he was sorry. While Barry was putting cans away in the pantry one afternoon, he heard Caroline talking to another worker. Caroline said, in a soft voice, "I don't know what to make of him being here. He hurt Natalie, so I don't trust him." The other worker said, "Maybe he's trying to make things right." Barry's heart beat fast. He wanted to say sorry and explain, but he knew it wasn't the right time. Instead, he focused on his work and carefully put the cans in order while his hands shook. As time went on, Barry saw little changes. She stopped going out of her way to avoid him. He sometimes saw her looking at him with a serious face. Barry and her husband even gave each other a nod one day as they walked down the hall. One day, Caroline's husband came up to Barry as he was struggling to move a heavy box of donations. "Do you need help with that? Why do you ask?" he asked, his voice calm but not mean. Barry gave a grateful nod. "Thank you, sir." They took the box to the storage room together. Her husband turned to Barry as they put it down. He looked at Barry's face and said, "You've been here every day for weeks now. Why?" She took a deep breath. He said, with a shaking voice, "I made a terrible mistake. I hurt your family, and I can't make it right. I want to try to fix things, even if it's only a little." Her husband was quiet for a moment, and then slowly nodded. He said, "I see. Well, we could use some help sorting these gifts." Not yet. It wasn't forgiveness, but as they worked together, Barry saw a sign of hope. He might have been on the right track to making things right. Barry was done with his job at the community center one evening when he ran into Caroline and her husband. As they stood in the empty dining room, the air became tense. "This is what Caroline said, Officer Barry." Her voice was stable, but full of feeling. "Let's talk." Even though Barry's heart was racing, he nodded, because he knew this moment had to happen. "Of course," he said, in a soft voice. He looked at Barry the whole time he spoke. He was Caroline's husband. "We've seen you working hard here every day, but we need to know why you picked on our daughter that day." Barry could feel a lump in his throat. He took a deep breath, and his hands started to shake a little. His voice was barely above a whisper as he said, "I made a terrible mistake. I made assumptions when I saw Natalie standing alone outside the store. I thought the worst would happen and didn't even try to understand what was going on." As he went on, Barry's eyes filled with tears. "I let my views get in the way of what I do. When I saw a child of color, I knew right away that she was up to no good. I forgot to be human because I was so focused on following the rules." As Caroline listened, her eyes were filled with tears that hadn't dried yet. Her husband put his hand on her shoulder to make her feel better. Barry's voice got weaker as he spoke. "I was so very, very wrong. Since then, every day, think about how much damage I did. Not just to Natalie, but to your whole family. I did not do what I was supposed to do because of my biases, and I failed in my job to protect and serve." He looked right at Caroline and her husband, and his face was filled with regret. "I'm truly sorry for the pain I caused your family. Natalie didn't deserve to be treated that way. Not a single kid does. I understand that. What I said can't change what happened. But I want you to know that I'm determined to change and become a better person." Caroline and her husband stood still for a moment as they thought about what Barry had said. The tears in his eyes and the sincerity in his speech said a lot. Caroline took a big breath, and her face became a little less serious. "Thank you for being honest, Officer Barry," she said, in a soft but still guarded voice. "It means a lot that you're sorry for what you did." Her husband agreed with her. "We all know how hard you've worked at the charity. It's clear that you want to make things right." Barry wiped his eyes, and a sense of calm came over him. He wasn't hoping for forgiveness, but the fact that they were willing to listen meant more to him than words could say. "What happened to Natalie is not something we can easily forget," Caroline said. But we can see that you're sorry and want to make things right. Change takes time and effort. We appreciate that you're putting in both." Barry gave a serious nod. "I understand. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to doing better." Caroline and her husband looked at each other and seemed to be talking quietly. She then turned back to Barry. After a moment, "We'd like you to continue volunteering here," she told me. "If you're serious about making things right, this is a good place to start." Barry looked at her with wide eyes in shock. "Really? You'd let me stay?" Caroline's husband said, "Yes. Actions speak louder than words, Officer Barry. We're giving you a chance to show us and the community that you mean what you say." Barry was filled with thanks. He said, "Thank you," and his voice was full of rage. "I promise I won't let you down." Caroline was able to smile a little. "We hope not. This charity means a lot to us and to the community. Your help is appreciated, and it's a step towards healing. And Officer Barry, one day, when Natalie feels ready, you can apologize to her too," Caroline said, as they got ready to leave. "But that's her choice, and we won't rush her." Barry gave a serious nod. "Of course, I understand completely. Thank you for this opportunity." Barry kept volunteering at the charity and always showed up on time. The mood was tense at first, with tired looks and quiet whispers following him around everywhere he went. Things started to change though, as the days turned into weeks. Barry was going through given clothes one afternoon when an old woman came up to him. She had kind eyes, but her face looked like it had been through a lot. "Are you that officer?" she asked in a soft voice. Barry nodded, and the shame on his face made him blush. "Yes, ma'am, I am." To his surprise, she gave him a soft pat on the arm. "It takes courage to face your mistakes, young man. I've seen you working hard here. Keep it up." Barry was deeply moved by what she said. He discovered that the community he had been suspicious of before was full of kind, strong people. Barry began to talk with the families who came for meals. As time went on, he heard their stories about losing their jobs, having to pay for medical bills, and other unexpected problems. Each talk made him think about what he thought he knew. A little boy and his mother came in one day. Barry could not help but think about how hard things were for him as a child. The child's shoes were worn down. In an instant, he found a pair of sneakers in the pile of donations that would fit the boy. "Here you go, buddy," Barry said, with a smile, as he hands them over. The boy's face lit up, and his mom's eyes filled with tears of joy. Caroline saw this conversation happen from the other side of the room. Afterward, she walked up to Barry with a serious look on her face. "You're really changing, aren't you?" Barry agreed, but he had a lump in his throat. "I'm trying. Being here has opened my eyes to so much." Caroline gave a small smile. "I can see that. You know, when you first started coming here, I wasn't sure if you were serious about making amends, but now, think you really are." Barry took what she said to heart, more than she knows. He was getting a new view of the world and his place in it. He used to wear the badge as a sign of power, but now it made him feel like he had a deeper duty to protect and serve. The next week, Barry's heart was racing as he stood on the porch of Natalie and Caroline's house. He calmed down and rang the doorbell. The sound could be heard all through the house, and Barry's hands got sweaty as he waited. Caroline opened the door with the cautious, but not mean look on her face. "Officer Barry," she whispered, "please come in." When Barry walked inside, he took off his hat. There were family pictures and bright art in the living room, making it feel cozy and warm. She looked at Barry with big eyes as she sat on the couch. Barry said with a heavy heart, "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." A chair across from Natalie and Caroline, who had sat down next to her daughter, told him to come in. Barry shook his head and looked Natalie straight in the eye. "Natalie, I want to apologize to you for what happened that day at the grocery store. I made a terrible mistake, and I hurt you. I'm so sorry for scaring you and for not listening to you when you tried to explain." Natalie's eyes were wet with tears that she hadn't wiped away, but she just nodded. After that, Barry looked at Caroline. "And to you, Caroline, I want to apologize for the pain and distress I caused your family. My actions were wrong, and I deeply regret them. I've learned so much since then about my own biases and the importance of truly serving and protecting our community." As Caroline listened to Barry's touching words, her face softened. He was being honest, and she could see it in his eyes and hear it in his words. "I know I can't undo what happened," he said, "but I want you both to know that I'm committed to doing better. I'm working hard to change, to be the kind of officer this community deserves." She put her hand on Barry's arm and reached out. "Thank you, Barry," she said, in a low voice. "Your apology means a lot to us. We can see how hard you've been working at the charity, and we appreciate your efforts to make things right." "Do you really mean that you're sorry?" Natalie asked in a low voice. She had been quiet up until now. Barry said yes, and tears started to form in his eyes. "I do, Natalie. I'm so sorry." Natalie then turned to look at her mother, who gave her a strong nod. Natasha then stood up and gave Barry a quick hug, which made him happy. "I forgive you," she said, in a low voice. While giving back the hug, Barry felt a weight lift off his shoulders. Natasha saw Caroline wiping away a tear when she took a step back. "We accept your apology, Barry," she said, "and we appreciate you coming here to talk to us. It's a big step towards rebuilding trust." People at the police station started to notice Barry's charity work as word got around. Many people weren't sure at first if Barry's change of heart was real or just a way to save his job. As the weeks went by, though, it became clear that their rigid friend had changed in a deep way. Officer Mina Thompson was one of the first people to notice the change. She had always found Barry's strict behavior annoying. She saw Barry walk into the station one morning with a smile on his face and call the cleaner by name. She said, "Good morning, Barry," her interest getting the best of her. "I hear you've been spending a lot of time at that local charity. How's that going?" Barry had big, happy eyes. "It's been eye-opening, Mina. I never realized how much impact a simple act of kindness could have on our community." While Barry talked about the families he'd met and the people he'd met, Mina became interested. She had never seen Barry this way before, kind, humble, and truly interested in other people's well-being. People in the department quickly heard about Barry's change. Detective Mike Roberts was one of the cops who still wasn't sure. "It's hard to change people," Mike complained in a staff meeting. "He's just trying to save face." But some people were interested. Officer Tom Chen, a new officer who had always been uncomfortable with the pushy behavior of the department, went up to Barry one afternoon. "Hey, Barry," he said cautiously, I was wondering if you could tell me more about that sensitivity training you went through. It sounds interesting." Barry gave a warm smile. "Of course, Tom. I'd be happy to share what I've learned. It's changed the way I see our role in the community." A small group of officers crowded around Barry and listened carefully as he talked about implicit bias and how important it is to build trust. Even Mike, who was skeptical at first, became interested in the talk. Through the end of the week, Barry's impact had spread to other parts of the department. During their breaks, officers talked about ways to help the neighborhood. Sarah even suggested starting a mentorship program for at-risk kids. His heart was beating fast as he walked into the police station. He had not worn his uniform in weeks, and the weight of doubt was heavy on his shoulders. As he got closer to the chief's office, he took a deep breath and prepared himself for the news that was waiting for him. The chief said, "Come in, Barry," but his voice wasn't mad. Barry walked inside with a straight back, but his eyes showed a mix of hope and fear. "You wanted to see me, sir?" The boss gave Barry a nod and a sign to sit down. "I've been reviewing your case. The investigation into the incident with young Natalie has concluded." Even though Barry's throat got tight, he kept quiet while he waited for the decision. "I must say, "I've been impressed by what you've done these past few weeks," the chief said. "Your volunteer work at the charity, your commitment to making amends, it shows a level of growth I wasn't sure you were capable of." There was a tiny bit of hope in Barry's heart, but he was afraid to show it. "After giving it a lot of thought, I've decided to put you back on active duty," the chief said. Barry felt calm, but the captain put out his hand before he could speak. "However, there are some conditions," he said strongly. "Your reinstatement comes with the requirement of ongoing community involvement. We want to ensure that this growth continues." Barry happily nodded. "Of course, sir. I'm more than willing to continue my work with the charity." "And it's more than that," he said. The chief spoke up. "We're implementing a new community outreach program, and I want you to be a part of it. You'll be required to attend monthly sensitivity training sessions and participate in community events. Additionally, you'll be partnered with Officer Thompson to lead youth engagement initiatives." Barry was excited and worried at the same time about the idea. He wasn't ready for how much he got, but he saw it as a chance to keep making a difference. He answered, "I understand, sir," and his voice was full of steel. "I won't let you down." The chief's stern face became a little less severe. "I believe you, Barry. This is your chance to be the kind of officer our community needs. Don't waste it." Barry knew that this was the start of a new phase in his career, one where he would focus on building relationships and understanding in the community he had sworn to protect and serve. As he left the office, his restored badge felt both old and new in his hand. As the weeks went by, Barry kept working with the charity and reaching out to people in the neighborhood. Natalie was often there, but she would always hide behind her mother or be busy with something far away from where he was working. Barry knew why she was hesitant and gave her room. He then focused on proving himself through his actions. On a sunny afternoon, Barry was helping to sort through donated clothes when he saw Natalie having a hard time carrying a big box of canned goods. His mind was elsewhere when he rushed over to help her. Barry said softly, "Here, I help you with that." He was careful not to scare her. Natalie looked up at him with shocked eyes. She looked uncertain for a moment, but then she gave a small nod. They moved the box to its goal together. While they worked together, Barry saw Natalie looking at him behind his back. When he gave her a soft smile, she surprised him by giving him a small smile back. Natalie stopped being so tired after that day. Barry was no longer something she avoided at the charity event. In fact, she would sometimes go up to him and ask for help. In order to show her that he was there for her, Barry was always patient and kind. Nicole came to trust Barry more over time. She asked him about his job and his life because she was naturally interested, not because she was afraid. Barry told her the truth, and a lot of the time, his stories made her laugh or gasp in amazement. Natalie looked at Barry with a serious face one day as they planted flowers in the community garden. She spoke in a soft but steady voice, "Officer Barry, I used to be afraid of you, but now I think you're nice." Barry could feel a lump in his throat. He responded, "Thank you, Natalie," his voice heavy with emotion. "That means a lot to me. I'm sorry I scared you before, and I promise to always be someone you can trust." Natalie said, "Yes," and a big smile spread across her face. After that, their friendship grew stronger. Barry became Natalie's guide and was there for her whenever she needed help or advice. She learned about safety from him, and he even taught her how to ride a bike. Barry learned that Natalie had not only forgiven him, but also taught him very important lessons about being innocent, trust, and the power of second chances. As their relationship grew, it made Barry want to keep growing and helping others, because she was honest and ready to see the good in him. As summer got closer, Natalie's family started making plans for their yearly event to help the community. This year, though, they had something different planned. Natalie's mom, Caroline, went up to Barry at the charity center one afternoon. With a smile on her face, she said, "Barry, we've been thinking. We'd like you to help us plan the event this year. We want to put our attention on bringing together locals and police." Barry looked at her with wide eyes in shock. "Really? Do you need my help?" Caroline said, "Yes. You've changed so much that we believe you can truly make a difference." Barry was moved by their trust in him and quickly agreed. This seemed like a chance for him to not only help the neighborhood, but also make things better between the police and the people who live there. During the next few weeks, Barry worked hard on making plans. He worked closely with Natalie's family to come up with fun and important ways to make the event happen. They chose to have a picnic-style get-together in the park, with games that would get officers and people from the neighborhood to talk to each other. Barry got in touch with his coworkers at the police station and asked them to join in. Some were unsure at first, but Barry's excitement made everyone else want to join in. He talked about how his own participation in the community helped him grow as a person. He told his coworkers, "This is our chance to show we're more than just uniforms. We can connect with the people we help in a real way." Coming up on the event day, Natalie and Barry worked together to make bright banners to put up around the park. The difference in how far they'd come amazed him. "Natalie, you looking forward to the picnic? What are you painting?" Barry asked. Natalie gave an eager nod. "Yes, I'm excited to see all the police cops having fun with everyone. We're going to have a great time." Barry smiled because her happiness made him feel good. He saw that this event wasn't just about fixing up relationships between adults. It was also about showing kids like Natalie that police officers can be friends and guardians they can trust. The day of the charity event came, and the park was packed with happy people. Barry got there early, and his heart was beating fast from excitement and worry. He saw families slowly come in, their looks showing that they were interested and unsure. As more police officers in casual clothes showed up, Barry greeted them warmly and told them to talk to people in the neighborhood. He planned a number of events to help people get to know each other and interact in a good way. A big sign that said "Community Unity Picnic" hung between two trees in the middle of the park. Barry had set up a face painting station below it, where police officers and park visitors took turns painting each other's faces with bright designs. Natalie laughed out loud as she talked a big police officer into letting her paint a butterfly on his face. When people saw the tough-looking cop with the pretty butterfly on his face, they all smiled. Barry went from one group to the next, introducing people and getting them to talk. He saw how the awkwardness started to go away as people talked about their lives over home-cooked meals. The dunk tank was one of the most liked things to do. A long line of people in the community lined up to dunk Barry, who had offered to be the first officer in the seat. When Barry jumped into the water over and over again, his happy laughter rang through the park and set a mood of fun and lightheartedness. Caroline went up to Barry while he was drying off with a towel. With her eyes shining, she told him, "This is amazing. Take a look. I had no idea something like this would happen in our town." Barry looked after her and took in the scene. Cops were pushing kids on swings, and teens were showing cops how to do cool dance moves. People were laughing and talking to each other everywhere he looked. Barry responded with a heavy heart, "It's all because of you and your family. You let me try again. You taught me what community means." Barry noticed that the mood changed as the afternoon went on. The anxiety that had been there before was gone, and in its place was a feeling of warmth and friendship. He heard bits and pieces of talks where police officers and residents were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to get together again. The event wasn't just a success. It was a shift in things. It was in Barry's bones. Tomorrow, the police and the community will work together, understand each other, and build trust and cooperation. Today was the start of a new phase. After the charity event went well, Barry spent more and more time with Natalie's family over the next few weeks. What started out as an attempt to make things right turned into a real friendship that touched his heart in ways he never thought possible. Barry drank lemonade on the porch of Natalie's family home on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and watched Natalie play with her friends in the front yard. Caroline joined him and sat down next to him in the chair with a happy sigh. She spoke with a soft voice. "You know, Barry, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're a part of our lives now." Barry could feel a lump in his throat. He looked at Caroline with eyes filled with thanks. His answer was soft. "I can't tell you how much that means to me. Your family has made my life better in ways I never thought possible." Barry's thoughts went back to the day of the event as he sat there. He remembered how angry, defensive, and sure he was that he was right. It seems like a very long time ago. He was amazed at how different he had become as he watched Natalie play and laugh. Barry shook his head and said, "I was so caught up in my own biases. I thought I was doing my job, but all I did was make things worse. I learned what a real community looks like from your family." She put her hand on his and squeezed it. "Barry, we all mess up sometimes. The important thing is how we grow and learn from them." Barry nodded, and a wave of emotion went through him. On movie nights, Natalie made him sit next to her. And at family dinners, he thought about the long talks he had with Caroline and her husband about life, society, and second chances. It was hard for Barry to speak because he was so thankful. She said, "You could have kept me out, but you let me in. The way you treat others has taught me more than any schooling ever could." Barry saw how much his life had changed as the sun went down and put a warm glow over the neighborhood. Officer Barry, the tough cop who saw danger everywhere, was no longer just him. Barry was his name. He was a friend, a teacher, and an important person in this town. When Barry went back to work as a soldier, he did it with a new attitude. He had changed a lot because of what he had learned from Natalie's family and from helping. He now had a new, more compassionate view of the people he worked with in the neighborhood. On his first day back on watch, Barry ran into something that would have made him act hastily in the past. A young man was standing outside of a convenience shop and looking tense. In the past, Barry would have thought the worst right away. But now, he stopped and thought about it differently. "Hi there," Barry yelled out, and his voice was friendly. "Is everything okay?" The young man looked up in shock. "I'm ready to see my mom. She's inside getting my little sister meds." Barry nodded because he remembered Natalie's similar reasoning. "Thanks for waiting out here. It's really hot today. Would you like some water?" The young man smiled happily as his stiff shoulders relaxed. "That would be nice. Thanks." As Barry gave him a water bottle from his police car, they started talking, and Barry found out about the boy's family and how hard things are for them. When the boy's mother came out of the shop, Barry had learned a lot about the people he worked with. When Barry got back to the station, his coworkers saw that he had changed. Officer Thompson, who was known for being tough, looked at Barry with interest as he talked to a group of teens hanging out in the park. "Barry, what's wrong with you?" Thompson asked afterward. "You used to be the first to kick people out who were just hanging out." Joey smiled. "I've learned that people only need a chance to be heard sometimes. Those kids, they were planning to clean up the neighborhood. We will now help them get the necessary licenses." As the weeks went by, Barry's new way of doing things started to affect other people in the area. He talked about what he had been through and urged his fellow officers to get more involved with the community. Some people didn't believe Barry at first, but as they saw how his methods worked, they started to change too. The boss called Barry into his office one day. "Officer Barry," the boss said, "to start. The new way you do neighborhood policing has been talked about a lot. I'm pleased, I have to say." He felt very proud of himself. "Thank you, sir. I've learned a lot about how important it is to understand and care about others at work." The boss gave a nod. "I'd like you to teach the department about your methods in a workshop. I believe that what you've learned could help all of us." Barry had a sense of purpose he had never had before. As he left the office, he wasn't just following the rules. He was also making the community stronger and more connected. It all began with a little girl named Natalie and her family, who taught him what it means to have a second shot. Barry was nervous and excited at the same time as he stood on the porch of Natalie's family house. He calmed down and rang the doorbell. Natalie's bright smile met him when the door opened. "Hey, Officer Barry," she yelled with her eyes sparkling. "Arrive. Everyone is ready for you." When Barry walked in, the warm smell of home-cooked food surrounded him. People laughed and talked all over the house. Nicole's mom, Caroline, came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She hugged him and said, "Barry, I'm so glad you could make it. Almost time for dinner." Barry went into the dining room with them and saw that the table was set for a big meal. Mark, Natalie's dad, was putting a dish in the middle to cook. "There he is." Mark smiled and tapped Barry on the shoulder. "Our honored guest." Barry was amazed as he watched everyone eat. People who he had hurt so badly before were now taking care of him like family. The talk went smoothly and was full of jokes, stories, and memories that were shared. During a break in the conversation, Barry cleared his throat. "Thank you so much for giving me a second chance and teaching me what it means to really serve and protect. You've made my life better." She put her hand on his and squeezed it. "Barry, you're now part of our family. We are all impressed by how willing you are to learn and grow." Natalie spoke up, "And you're the best at helping me with my math." Everyone laughed, and Barry's chest felt warm. He knew that this family had not only forgiven him, but also made him feel completely at home. As the night went on, Barry helped clear the table. "After what I did, I never thought I'd be here," he said softly as they stood in the kitchen together. "I'm so thankful." Caroline gave a grin. "That, Barry, the power of forgiveness and the strength of a group. When we help each other out, we all grow." After Barry nodded, he felt calm come over him. He looked out the window at the quiet street and thought about how different it looked now than when he was on watch. There, the future was wide open in front of him, full of hope and chances to keep growing. If you enjoyed the story of Officer Barry and Natalie, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.